The philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it. Catch a man a fish, and you can sell it to him. Teach a man to fish, and you ruin a wonderful business opportunity. If you can cut the people off from their history, then they can be easily persuaded. When the sufferers learn to think, then the thinkers will learn to suffer. We have no compassion, and we ask no compassion from you. When our turn comes, we shall not make excuses for the terror. The meaning of peace is the absence of opposition to socialism. A heavy or progressive or graduated income tax is necessary for the proper development of communism. There must be something rotten in the very core of a social system which increases its wealth without diminishing its misery. In a higher phase of communist society, after the enslaving subordination of the individual to the division of labor, and therewith also the antithesis between mental and physical labor, has vanished after labor has become not only a means of life but life's prime want. After the productive forces have also increased with the all-round development of the individual, and all the springs of cooperative wealth flow more abundantly, only then can the narrow horizon of bourgeois right be crossed in its entirety and society inscribe on its banners, from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. The value of labor power is determined, as in the case of every other commodity, by the labor time necessary for the production, and consequently also the reproduction of this specific article. The value of labor power is the value of the means of subsistence necessary for the maintenance of the laborer. The proletariat, the lowest stratum of our present society, cannot stir, cannot raise itself up, without the whole superincumbent strata of official society being sprung into the air. The worker becomes all the poorer the more wealth he produces. The more his production increases in power and range. The worker becomes an ever cheaper commodity the more commodities he creates. With the increasing value of the world of things proceeds in direct proportion the devaluation of the world of men. Labor produces not only commodities, it produces itself and the worker as a commodity, and does so in the proportion in which it produces commodities generally. The alienation of the worker in his product means not only that his labor becomes an object, an external existence, but that it exists outside him, independently, as something alien to him, and that it becomes a power on its own confronting him. It means that the life which he has conferred on the object confronts him as something hostile and alien. The ideas of the ruling class are in every epoch the ruling ideas, i.e., the class which is the ruling material force of society is at the same time its ruling intellectual force. The ruling ideas are nothing more than the ideal expression of the dominant material relationships. The dominant material relationships grasped as ideas. The proletariat, the lowest stratum of our present society, cannot stir, cannot raise itself up, without the whole superincumbent strata of official society being sprung into the air. Accumulation of wealth at one pole is at the same time accumulation of misery, agony of toil, slavery, ignorance, brutality, mental degradation. At the opposite pole, the education of all children, from the moment that they can get along without a mother's care, shall be in state institutions. Communism begins where atheism begins. The executive of the modern state is but a committee for managing the common affairs of the whole bourgeoisie. The working class is revolutionary, or it is nothing. Communism is the riddle of history solved, and it knows itself to be this solution. The ideas of the ruling class are in every epoch the ruling ideas. Workers of the world unite, you have nothing to lose but your chains. In proportion, therefore, as the repulsiveness of the work increases, the wage decreases, from each according to his abilities, to each according to his needs. The free development of each is the condition for the free development of all. Revolutions are the locomotives of history. History repeats itself, first as tragedy, Second is farce. Capital is dead labor, which vampire-like lives only by sucking living labor, and lives the more labor it sucks. The worker therefore only maintains his labor power in this process insofar as he sells it as a commodity to the capitalist. In so doing, he actually sells labor, which can only manifest itself in labor processes, i.e., in the actual performance of work. It is only by being used up that labor power becomes value. The theory of the communists may be summed up in the single-sentence abolition of private property. Do not be deluded by the abstract word freedom. Whose freedom? Not the freedom of one individual in relation to another, but freedom of capital to crush the worker. The better shaped his product, the more misshapen the worker. Owners of capital will stimulate working class to buy more and more of expensive goods, houses and technology, pushing them to take more and more expensive credits, until their debt becomes unbearable. The unpaid debt will lead to bankruptcy of banks, which will have to be nationalized, and state will have to take the road which will eventually lead to communism. The production of too many useful things results in too many useless people. The history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles. Freeman and slave, patrician and plebeian, lord and serf, guild master and journeyman, in a word, oppressor and oppressed, stood in constant opposition to one another, carried on an uninterrupted, now hidden, now open fight, a fight that each time ended either in a revolutionary reconstitution of society at large, or in the common ruin of the contending classes. In the social production of their life, men enter into definite relations that are indispensable and independent of their will. Relations of production which correspond to a definite stage of development of their material productive forces. The sum total of these relations of production constitutes the economic structure of society, the real foundation, on which arises a legal and political superstructure, and to which correspond definite forms of social consciousness. The mode of production of material life conditions the general process of social, political, and intellectual life. It is not the consciousness of men that determines their existence, but their social existence that determines their consciousness. The communists disdain to conceal their views and aims. They openly declare that their ends can be attained only by the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions. Let the ruling classes tremble at a communist revolution. In short, the communists everywhere support every revolutionary movement against the existing social and political order of things. The value of a commodity is determined by the quantity of socially necessary labor time required to produce it. A commodity appears at first sight an extremely obvious, trivial thing, but its analysis brings out that it is a very strange thing, abounding in metaphysical subtleties and theological niceties. What the working man sells is not directly his labor, but his laboring power, the temporary disposal of which he makes over to the capitalist. This is so much the case that I do not know whether by the English law, but certainly by some continental laws, the maximum time is fixed for which a man is allowed to sell his laboring power. If allowed to do so for any indefinite period whatever, slavery would be immediately restored. Such a sale, if it comprised his lifetime, for example, would make him at once the lifelong slave of his employer. Labor produces marvels for the rich, but it produces deprivation for the worker. It produces palaces, but hovels for the worker. It produces beauty, but deformity for the worker. It replaces labor by machines, but it throws one section of the workers back to barbaric labor, and it turns the remainder into machines.